right, guys, let's learn about movements. Okay, I listed out on your guys' PowerPoint a whole bunch of different movements broken down by body part, as far as what body parts do certain movements, at least the movements that I want you to know and be able to recognize. So we'll start off with the neck and we'll kind of work our way down. So first of all, the neck, there are 3 motions I want you guys to know. These are essentially my yes and no motions. So neck flexion would be when my neck bends forward, right? So this is, if you guys see me from the side, neck flexion would be essentially me looking down toward my chest. Okay, that is neck flexion. All right, versus extension would be the opposite motion where I'm looking up. So neck extension would be that way. Okay, so that is flexion and extension. Those are essentially my yes movements. Okay, versus my no movement is rotation. So I can rotate my head from side to side. That's occurring in my neck. Okay, so that's rotation. Again, yes and no motions are what my neck can do. There's those 3. My trunk can also do those same motions. Okay, so my trunk I think about basically from the top of my pelvic girdle all the way to the base of my neck. This is essentially my trunk, right? So my trunk can flex, it can extend, and it can rotate just like my neck. What does that look like? Well, trunk flexion would be like if I'm trying to reach down for my toes. So it'd be flexing my trunk forward, just like that. Okay, that's essentially me bending forward. Doing a sit-up is also doing trunk flexion. Okay, versus what's trunk extension? Well, that's going back the other way, being able to come back this way, all right? So flexion and extension. And then we also have rotation, which similar to the neck, right? We can do that with our trunk. We can rotate side to side as well. Okay, so flexion, extension, rotation. All right, moving on to my appendages, my shoulder to start off with. What does my shoulder do? Well, remember it's a ball and socket joint, so it can basically do everything. So first it can flex. So what does shoulder flexion look like? That's kind of a tricky one to think about. Shoulder flexion is actually when I bring my arm up over my head. So I'm bringing my arm up directly in front of me, bringing it over my head. This is shoulder flexion, okay? It's happening at my shoulder joint. I don't care about what my elbow and my wrist are doing. My shoulder joint is flexing. Okay, it could do the same thing if my elbow was bending. My shoulder joint's still doing the same thing if I do this motion. Flexion. Okay, versus extension would be the opposite way. So if this is flexion, then this is extension. This is my arm is going back behind me. Shoulder extension. Okay. And then I have abduction and adduction. So abduction is going away from my body. So that would be me bringing my arm out to the side. That's abduction, versus bringing it back down toward my body is adduction, adduction. So abduction and adduction, right? And then the last thing that my shoulder can do that I want you guys to know is rotate. So it can rotate in and it can rotate out, right? I can do that in so many different motions. My shoulder can do so much fun stuff. It can rotate while it's abducting and while it's flexing. It can do all sorts of stuff. Okay, again, it doesn't really matter what position my elbow's in. My shoulder can still rotate. All right. Ooh, I do it with this arm now because this arm's tired. All right, next we have our elbow. Our elbow's much simpler than our shoulder because at the main joint of my elbow, it's a hinge joint. So I can flex it, which means I'm bending it, and I can extend it, which means I'm straightening it. Flexion, extension. All right. I can also rotate my elbow though at a different joint, at the radioulnar joint, and that looks like this, being able to rotate my hand down and then back up. Rotate, rotate, okay? All right, I don't need you guys to know the wrists and the fingers. We're not gonna focus on those. Now we're gonna move to the lower extremities, so let me back up. So let's think about the hip. Hip is just like my shoulder. It can do all sorts of motions because it's a ball and socket joint. So my hip, first it can flex. What does that look like? That would be me kicking out in front of me. This is hip flexion, kicking my hip out in front of me. What would extension be? Extension is the opposite of that. So extension would be kicking my leg out behind me. Hip extension, okay? Flexion, extension. Great. What about abduction and adduction? Abduction is out to the side. So abduction is kicking my leg out to the side. Okay, that's happening at my hip joint. Versus adduction would be bringing my leg back in. And even if I was to cross in front of my body, that would also be adduction. Okay, so this little hurdler's warm up that a lot of people do, that's abduction and adduction. All right, what about my rotations? I can rotate, right? I can rotate my hip out. I can rotate my hip in. Okay, in, out. So extension, flexion, abduction, adduction, rotation. All those motions happen at my shoulder and my hip. All right, the last joint is my knee. My knee, super simple joint. What does it do? It flexes, so it bends, and it extends. It straightens. Flex, extend. Okay, we aren't gonna worry about the ankle or the toes and the rest of the feet. So that's it for the motions that you guys need to know.